Hello and welcome to Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. I'm Britt Scarce, your host with Emory Federal Credit Union, and here today in studio we have Karl Ulrich with Sebaly, Shillito, and Dyer, and Pandy Pridemore from The Human Resource USA, here to talk to us about video and audio recording and surveillance in the workplace. Karl, Pandy?
Hello, Britt.
Hi, Britt.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, is it okay for employers to pretty much videotape and record everything we do as employees?
Well, with most of these questions, this is one of those where the answer depends on circumstances. So from employer's perspective, you may have good reason to put up video monitors in the workplace. You may want to make sure that the equipment that your employees are using is maintained properly, or that there is no horseplay going on in the workplace if you don't have somebody present all the time to monitor your employees. To prevent theft, to manage ingress and egress, people coming in and out of the building. You want to monitor that. There may be security and safety considerations. Most of the companies I work with do have some form of surveillance, video surveillance going on in the workplace. Sometimes that includes an audio component, sometimes it doesn't. But very often it's for safety and security purposes, and that's a very legitimate reason for doing it, in my opinion.
Okay. Now, can employers get in trouble for doing this, Pandy? Can an employer do something they're not supposed to do with that recording?
Absolutely. There's always that fine line. And Ohio has a very distinct policy that if they're going to videotape, that has to be posted. And I'm talking about the signs on the doors so that everyone walking within that premises understands. No secret. Okay. No secrets. No. In fact, there are appropriate times even when it's just individualized in a meeting type setting where it's totally okay for a employer to set out a recorder and say, you know, while we have this conversation, I want to make sure I don't miss a word. I'm going to set it out here with the consent of the employee so that the conversation is completely recorded.
Okay. Now, how about the employee, Karl? Can the employee use their, I mean, everyone has a cell phone these days, right?
Right.
And, you know, can an employee record, you know, meetings and things that maybe, you know, the employer doesn't know they're recording? Right.
Well, again, you know, everybody does it. We know it happens, whether they're allowed to do it by company policy or not. We know it's going on. So there's certain limitations of what employees are allowed to do, and for the most part, though, unless the employer says within their workplace context that it's not allowed, they're generally allowed to do it, right? There's no rule against it unless the employer imposes one. So unless it's regulated, it's not, right? So you know, employees have the right, for example, and their rights are protected by federal law to talk to each other about terms and conditions of employment. So if they're engaged in conversation about terms and conditions of employment, or using the video to or some kind of audio device to record those conversations, assuming that those conversations are not non-working time, there's nothing to prevent them from doing that, and that right might actually be protected by federal law under certain circumstances. But obviously, if they're supposed to be working behind a machine, or if they're engaged in driving a forklift, or if they're involved in some other work effort and they're communicating on the side with somebody else on non-work related matters, or outside of their work activities, then yeah, that might step over the line. So again, it does depend a great deal on the circumstances.
I would assume privacy issues, or if the employer works around sensitive information, or you know, something that, let's say you're a government you know, contractor or something. I'm sure there's laws that say that, you know, hey, you can't disclose what we work on, or if there's personal information about clients, you know, that could be revealed by some sort of a video.
Well,
or
the key is non-public.
Okay.
If the information's non-public, then you want to stay away from it. But let's get into more of a common environment like a doctor's office, or a school, a daycare, where that's information that just cannot, it's just inappropriate to be videotaping or audio taping in those kind of environments. And those kind of companies are automatically going to put those kind of policies in their handbooks. If they're not, then oh my gosh, get them in there.
Yeah.
Get them in there, because again, much of that is state regulated. Daycare will not allow you to take pictures of the children and then pass it out on social media as to what children are in what facilities.
Right. Although a lot of daycares have, cameras in their, in their playrooms that parents can even like look up on their phone and watch their child.
But keep in mind, you just said two different things. We're talking about two different things: the employee doing it versus the company doing it.
Okay.
And the company's doing it to a targeted audience for a specific reason, where the employee would just be going around taking shots of the kids and sending them out to the general population and the public. So that's two different directives there.
And the key often is consent. I mean, a lot of
There you go.
situations, for example, where you have a daycare facility or something like that, most of the parents would be aware of that, should be aware of that coming in, and they would have presumably provided their consent for surveillance. The other thing I think we can't ignore too is that from the employee's perspective, there are also certain privacy considerations here. We talked about, and Pandy touched upon it, in a doctor's office, for example, there's health information that could be very private. But just in a general work setting, oftentimes circumstances may lead to an expectation of privacy. So it is not legal, it is not correct for an employer, for example, to put a surveillance camera in a changing room or in a restroom. Obviously, those are areas where employees have an expectation of privacy, and that expectation is legal enforceable. So, violation of that expectation of privacy would be problematic for the employer. There's information that might be personal and unique to a particular individual, personal banking information in an employment file, other things like that, which might, the employee might not want to have publicized for a variety of reasons. That information carries with it potentially an expectation of privacy. So we do have to remember that even within a workplace scenario, employees themselves do have enforceable, legally protected expectations of privacy in certain circumstances, both in place and in subject matter.
Now, Pandy, have you seen situations where, going back to the employees videotaping or audio taping things, where that's been a problem?
Absolutely, especially if they drop what they're doing and break away from the purpose of their role, and they decide they're going to do a crazy YouTube video, or they're going to tape a fight out in the parking lot that's for recreational purposes. Again, many companies will say no cell phones in the workplace. No cell phones while you're during work
working,
hours. So that's a violation if they're pulling it out and doing it for non-oriented, just entertainment purposes. It's a fine line. It's a very, very fine line. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad.
Well, what about something where someone's trying to catch someone that's perhaps harassing another coworker or that particular coworker? Would it be legal for that coworker to film that activity and use that as evidence of harassment?
Presumably, yeah, it would be. I mean, I
They
think
wouldn't necessarily, get that thrown out because you're not supposed to have that in the workplace.
Yeah, the workplace, a violation of a workplace rule in, for example, a situation where an employee might be feeling as though they're being harassed, so they record a conversation surreptitiously. That might violate a company rule, but they're doing it for their own protection. Ultimately, they turn around and file a lawsuit, for example, against that supervisor or that coworker for harassment. The law isn't probably going to prevent that video or recording from being used as evidence. Now, the person might lose their job for violation of the company policy, and that's another matter, but the evidentiary value of that might still be good. It's not like, a police search and seizure, where a violation of a search and seizure a Fourth Amendment would, prevent the admissibility of the evidence. It doesn't quite work that way in a non-criminal context, but that does happen, and in many respects, I think that activity might even be protected under certain laws, federal laws. National Labor Relations Act is one example of where that even if in violation of an explicit company rule. If it's in to track and to monitor potential sexual harassment, the NLRB might actually step in to protect that particular recording. So again, it's very circumstantial. It does depend on the circumstances, and we really have to look at these individually. But company workplace rules are very common in this area, and again, I think employers should be ready to protect trade secret proprietary information, should be ready to utilize surveillance for purposes of protecting property and monitoring safety in compliance with standard safety rules. That's a perfectly legitimate basis for doing it. And every once in a while, those video or audio recordings will be useful for the company and for the employees for their own protection sometimes.
Yeah, we've used them a number of times.
Yeah.
A
So,
number of times.
Speaking of that, Pandy, what best practices, what should employers do as far as setting policies around this?
Well, I'm going to go back to his last comment. If there is a need for safety, let's say somebody's running 3 shifts and they've got a limited number of individuals in the facility late at night, especially if they're female, I highly recommend video recording. But making sure that everyone understands that by the proper postings, understanding the communication is clear, and then setting the expectations of privacy and understanding when that's used, who has access to those tapes. You don't make those available to all your directors. That's strictly your security guys or your owners, business owners, and making sure that the handbook relates to that. No videotaping by the employee. The employer has the right to, and just making sure that everybody is on the same page with it.
Yeah.
It's all communication.
Yeah.
No one, I had one company go, oh my gosh, we can't put tapes up because it's Big Brother and you're spying and you spend more time watching the tapes. You don't trust your employees. In actuality, it was just the reverse. It was a trucking company with a huge warehouse and logistics, and it was a matter of if somebody got hurt in the back corner of 100,000 square foot of warehouse, we might not hear them.
Yeah.
But we could see them.
Yeah.
And if
Well,
somebody's
it's a
walking
safety
on the
issue
property,
there.
absolutely. When we're walking through the property, if there's a stranger, they haven't signed in. Again, we can see them. If there's
Right.
an issue of theft, if there's an
Right,
issue,
they could be loading something onto a truck,
Absolutely.
driving it off premises.
Absolutely. I mean, it just depends. The company needs to decide what the needs of the business are,
Yeah.
and if it does address the needs, and then just make sure everybody's on the same page.
And keep in mind, too, for safety considerations, if OSHA comes in and does an investigation of workplace accident and video surveillance is being used, they will request copies of those surveillance tapes, and they will review them.
Which could help the employer
Which could
tremendously.
in many cases
Both.
help the employer.
Yeah.
Now, it might also be the reverse,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
It can go either way.
Sure.
But if the worst thing that could happen is that if you do video surveillance, OSHA comes and requests the videotapes, and then they're not available because they've been overwritten or because they've been discarded,
Or not loaded.
Now it
or
looks
not
like
loaded,
you're hiding something.
then it looks right, and so that provides other. It may have other implications, but again,
Make sure it works. If you
make sure.
But seriously, no dummy cameras.
Yeah.
How some will put the dummy cameras out
Yeah.
in the parking lot because they want to deter. And don't even bother.
Yeah.
Don't even bother.
Yeah, well, nowadays with all the potential threats and all the potential issues, it seems like it's a no-brainer that you should do it. Personally, I think, because you have the safety of, you think of all the different, like say workplace violence things that have happened and stuff and all that, that sometimes was what alerted somebody to get people out or, I think it's, as much as we kind of feel like that's an invasion of privacy, in a lot of ways, it could really help save a lot of people's lives or really protect the business.
I have a trucking company that actually puts the cameras on the front of the truck, so they can actually see the traffic and the maneuverability of their drivers. So not only do they have the electronic data coming through, but they also have this camera, and it's like, okay, if needed.
Yeah. Well, this is great information. Pandy, Karl, very important topic and very timely in today's world. I think there's recording going on everywhere. So definitely make sure that you catch up on all the rules and everything surrounding this. And if you are utilizing surveillance or doing any kind of recording, make sure that you're following all the rules, right? So you've been watching Business Talk. Until next time, we'll see you right here.